Welcome everybody to the Great Reset, Human Performance Strategies to Keep Your Organization Thriving. If you did not sign up for the Great Reset, you are in the wrong webinar today. So welcome, I hope everybody's in the right place. It's great to see so many people that I'm familiar with. I am Julie Wright, President of Wright on Communications. I'm also a member of the IABC Los Angeles Board. And I do want to thank the IABC Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego chapters for hosting our webinar today. For those who don't know my background, Wright on Communications is the agency that I founded the same year as Google Incorporated, so it's been a few decades. And while we might not be a globally known brand, 2 weeks ago we were named one of Forbes 2021 Best PR Agencies in America. So that's an honor I'm happy to take. Yeah, big deal for us, very nice. And I'm also a partner in X, and that's something I will talk about briefly in another moment after I hand it off to my fantastic co-presenter for her introduction.
Hi, everybody. Mary Randall. I'm with Accelerate. We're a strategy execution consultant firm. And I am the practice director for our human performance optimization practice area. And I've spent the last 15 years or so in organizational development and leadership background. So I'm happy to share some of my expertise and knowledge with you all today.
And I will encourage you during this presentation, if you have questions and you want to capture them while we're moving through the content, maybe to put them in the comments so that we can come to them at the end. I know that holding your questions can be sometimes problematic, so that might be a helpful way to do it. We do hope to leave some time for discussion because I know there's a lot of really smart and experienced folks in this group, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of this content as well. So, X, what brings Mary from Accelerate and Julie together from Wright on Communications? It's our joint venture. And what we have done is combined the management consulting experience of Accelerate and specifically their strategy execution focus and Wright on Communications strategic communications capabilities to help our clients move their strategies forward more successfully. Today, we're going to focus on one of our practice areas, which is organizational development and employee experience specifically, but just to give you kind of an overview of where Mary and I are coming from on this.
And today we're excited to share with you some of the research and insights that we've obtained as it relates to maximizing human performance. We're going to start with an overview of what we believe are core tenets that exist today, as well as talk about kind of what's changed and continuing to change as we go through what we're titling here, Great Reset. We didn't come up with that, but borrowing. And we'll dive into 3 key disruptions we've all been experiencing in 2020. And share some statistics and possible future impact and examples of companies that are leading the way. So we'll finish up with tips on how you and your organization can take action and make the most of the opportunities presented. And we also, again, as Julie said, plan to save time for open discussion at the end. So let's jump in. You can go to the next slide. I don't know if it's
a little slow. Are you seeing it?
Not yet. Okay, there you go. All right, so we're going to start by looking at those 3 key principles that we believe are all about maximizing human performance within organizations. We're going to come back to these at the end as a way to share the tips for taking action as well. First, we believe organizational culture is critical. And so this is where we're going to talk about what it means to say, culture is not a building. This was a phrase that was recently shared with me, and it really resonated during this time of deep change. So I want to talk a little bit more later about what that may look like for all of us. We'll also talk about leadership as the key to supporting your people through setting expectations, providing the tools and resources to do the work successfully. And then finally, talent development and what this looks like as we consider the future of work in a post-pandemic world. And we might be looking at these 3 tenets a little differently than we did pre-COVID, but each is profoundly important to the employee experience. And that's what we want to discuss a little more.
So that was a quick overview from Mary on 3 tenets, 3 principles that haven't changed. Let's talk about now what has changed. And so a term like the Great Reset, which is a phrase coined by the World Economic Forum, definitely indicates change. And I think it's a way for them to label this period that we've all been enjoying in a sort of more optimistic and forward-looking way. What it builds on is something that has been taking place over the past few years, which is a model of stakeholder capitalism, which is how organizations are moving away from this idea that we're all about maximizing shareholder value. If you're a for-profit organization, that model may not be as sustainable as a model that starts to take into account all your stakeholders, and all your stakeholders certainly include your employees, the community you operate in, and so on. In 2019, so the year before the pandemic, the Business Roundtable, an organization of over 100 CEOs of major US organizations, put out a new commitment to employees and communities. So there is this movement that has been building, and COVID-19 has somewhat accelerated this as well. We're seeing that people are beginning to look at their employees differently and valuing human capital differently. It's estimated that 52% of a organization's market value is intangible assets, but a big piece of that is human capital. And Mary's going to talk a little bit more about the way that the World Economic Forum is framing this view of human capital.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And as she mentioned, the need for valuing human capital differently has become increasingly important topic among executives and corporations worldwide. In fact, the World Economic Forum recently released a 2020 HR accounting report and came up with a new framework for valuing human capital. The framework includes 7 guiding principles, and we're not going to go too deeply into these today, but these principles included things such as prioritizing purpose over profits, shifting toward corporate social responsibility, and living the values even outside the organization. It's also the concept of the organization being part of the larger ecosystem as opposed to just a standalone entity, and the human-centric approach to people, work, and skills, which goes beyond day-to-day tasks and responsibilities, and the valuation of the workforce as an asset. It's not an expense anymore. And the need for forward-looking value metrics that take a generational approach over short-term quarterly earnings. So what you'll notice about these 7 guiding principles is that they all put people at the center of the equation, with a focus on maximizing stakeholder well-being and not just maximizing shareholder value. So we'll refer back to these principles in some of the examples we give throughout our time today. All right. So it's time to start talking about the disruptions of 2020. And as we all have experienced, 2020 has been a game changer in so many ways. And truthfully, in preparing for this, Julie and I talked about so many disruptions we could have brought to the table. But in the end, we felt these 3 had one thing in common. They all offer a unique opportunity for organizations to set a new path as we think about the Great Reset, and set it up in a way that shows that valuing maximizing human capital is essential. And so the 3 to us were continued trend toward declining trust in leadership. So we've actually seen this for a number of years happening in government, media, and even NGOs, non-governmental organizations. But now we're starting to see that decline even within businesses. So something to pay attention to. And with social and environmental responsibility and the role of businesses, as we will be expecting them to honestly steward a response to address these concerns. And then finally, the impact of the work from home revolution, and how it can be positive for many of us, but can also be a strain on our mental health. And what do we do about that? Let's go a little deeper on each one of these.
Right. So here we go. What do we do about work from home and mental health? I think first it's important to set some context. In March, before we had our shutdown in California, 1 in 4 workers in the US was working remotely. By April, that number jumped to 62%. And of that group, for a big number, it was their first time working remotely. So not only is it, just a lot of immediate and fast disruption, it requires a lot of new behaviors and mindsets.
Yeah, and some of the statistics that we're seeing, again, a study done by McKinsey shows that 55% of leaders are expecting that at least half their workforce is going to either become or stay partially or fully remote. And 60% of leaders are feeling this needs a new cultural aspiration, behaviors, and mindsets in order to make the shift. And then 69% of leaders planning to or already are in process of implementing new approaches to talent and skills, which is good news that at least they're thinking about it. But as we hear about companies like REI canceling construction of their headquarters, or Microsoft announcing a long-term work from home option for their employees, it's clear that these changes are here to stay. And so it's no longer a matter of if we're going to stay remote or go back into the office. It's a question of how do organizations need to change to address the new environment work from home creates. And so one reality, as we probably all felt a little bit at first, was it was so exciting to be at home. We didn't have the commute, and productivity actually showed that it was going up. Gallup research found that majority of work from home employees felt more productive, or at least no reduction in productivity. So that was the good news. The not so great news is, and I know it's taking a moment to transition, but the initial adrenaline and novelty, I think, has started to wear off. And now we've got the back to school for kids, which is back to Zoom school, really. And one survey actually found that 84% of employees across the board at all levels and types of work reported that their mental health had suffered and is continuing to suffer. So recent reports have also estimated that 800,000 women have left the workplace when schools reopened in August and September. And while kids are not going to be home forever, it's clear that we need to figure out if work from home is really sustainable for everyone. And I actually found some data. It was an interesting poll on LinkedIn that someone was doing with the various like options that they have now. And they asked everybody, do they want to stay remote? Do they want to work from the office? Do they want to return partial back in the office? And actually more than 60% of respondents, there was like 27,000 respondents to this poll, and 60% said that they wanted to return. And another, I think it was 30% said that they want an option to be both. So it was actually quite a lot of responses saying, I want some kind of hybrid, or I want to be back in the office, which was surprising because I think we felt very differently early on. So
well, I think all the moms in the crowd can definitely agree that sometimes escaping to the office would be preferable. So we can talk a little bit about some organizations that are making this change and making this pivot to work from home successful. So I think there's a few good examples that we found. One, surprisingly, is in the federal government. And it's the US Patent and Trade Office. So this process of working from anywhere that they introduced was started before the pandemic, but there's some just excellent data that shows those patent examiners who took advantage of the work from anywhere option were 4.4% more productive than their colleagues working in Washington, DC. And the way the USPTO has structured this is these examiners all have the option to work possibly where the cost of living is lower, and they can take advantage of that, or maybe where their quality of life is higher because it's closer to family. But they are responsible for getting back to DC for meetings 12 times a year. So there is a bit of a catch, but at the end of the day, they found a great satisfaction. I think people have more choice and control in that kind of policy. And so maybe there's some apples and oranges there to the pandemic, but you can see that, if you really embrace work from home and this idea of work from anywhere, you also have the option of talent from anywhere. In the end, what this move did is it also got the US Patent and Trade Office recognized as one of the best places to work in the federal government. And we've included some of the examples of the World Economic Forum human valuation principles. And we see the USPTO as an example of an organization not focusing on employees and jobs, but focusing on people, work, and skills. UBS, the financial company, introduced a ways of working platform. It was something that had been in development prior to the pandemic, but it launched in March. And it was a platform. I love this example because it ties into Mary's three principles: the things that don't change, the talent development, helping people grow and develop, the culture emphasis, and then the role of leadership in making people feel supported and safe in their working environments. So what the UBS WOW platform did is it had these three modules. So the one setting a direction focused on skills. It let the employees know, look, we're in this new reality and we need to have a more agile culture. As they transitioned the culture to this more agile model, that requires new behaviors, and new behaviors require new skills. So this module, setting the direction, made it very easy for them to access the skills and training they needed to be successful in this new environment. So that checks that box. And then the other box, the leadership box, the employee support and health and well-being focus module, that helped people who are struggling with lifestyle issues and trade-offs and things at home and some of the anxiety, that has come with all of these changes, and equipped managers, leaders with tools to be able to demonstrate their support and care for their employees. And then the third piece is the culture piece, where UBS emphasized its values, talked about how this was aligning with its goal of resiliency, and how it would come out of this situation as a stronger organization and give people something to look forward to. And approaching all of its people in this manner, we felt was an example of a workforce, treating a workforce as an asset.
Great example.
So obviously, social responsibility and environmental issues, we can't talk about 2020 and not talk about these things. They had a direct impact on business. Issues of racial inequality, issues of income inequality, and concerns that haven't gone away about the climate. Today, employees and consumers, they want to work for and buy products from brands that reflect their values. And as you can see in the racial inequity statistics we pulled here, people expect the brands they work for or buy from to also use their power and privilege to help make change. And the stakeholder capitalism model and the idea behind the Great Reset is that organizations do take a stand on these things and they do lean into them, which makes sense. Ultimately, if you think about this, it's going to become very expensive, or at least not very profitable, if we live in a world where our consumers feel so disenfranchised that they're taking to the streets, or where our middle class is so eroded we don't have a market, or where California's fire season goes to 365 days a year. So I think there are some business imperatives for leaning in to these major issues. And when Mary talks a bit more about trust, you can start to see how it plays into these kinds of issues as well.
Yeah, thank you. So again, in this environment, businesses can show their principled approach to tackling and addressing issues impacting their customers, their stakeholders, or potentially experience the perception pitfalls of treating their coworkers as an expense instead of an asset. And so looking for examples of companies that are getting it right, we included the Singapore Airlines example, whose Care Ambassadors program early on in COVID prioritized both their internal stakeholders and their entire community by redeploying highly skilled employees to work in low-risk hospital wards. They use their skills to help with basic care needs of these individuals. So we saw this as meeting both the ecosystem approach as well as that social responsibility, and really focusing on people, work, and skills.
My bad.
Oh, that's okay. It just likes to. Whew.
Yeah. Heavy thumb.
And then the example I think a lot of us have heard of in the media with the Franklin Templeton, a financial services company who fired an employee caught on camera having a racist confrontation And this was one of the first major examples, but it's definitely not the last, where we've seen businesses setting expectations and really holding employees accountable for living the company's values, not only inside the organization, but outside as well. And then the final one with the example of Dove, where the company worked with legislators to pass the Crown Act. It was actually at the end of 2019. And this prevents discrimination against a person in the workplace for their natural or protected hairstyles. And this is really an example of Dove focusing on making people feel safe and supported and cared for, which is what we're looking for in this social responsibility age.
Great examples. So transitioning now to that third big issue that has affected 2020 is this declining trust in leadership that we've been seeing globally. And, as communicators, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Edelman Trust Barometer, which comes out every January. So I'm sure we all can't wait to see what January 2021's data says. But if you go back to their website, and we'll include links to some of these resources at the end of the presentation, you'll see that they've also been doing more research and publishing more research this year because we need to. What I find so fascinating about this image here is if you look at the matrix showing dimensions of trust. So how traditional institutions are evaluated for trust, but based on two things: ethical behaviors and perceptions and competencies. There's no organization right now that's viewed as both ethical and competent. So, hey, there's an opportunity. But you'll see that business, is seen as less ethical, but more competent, and NGOs or non-governmental organizations, it's the inverse, more ethical, but less competent. Media and government are neither ethical nor competent, apparently. But what we can see is that business has a good lead over government in terms of, how much it's trusted. It's trusted significantly more than government. And I think the most important thing for all of us to know as communicators is some of the research that is used to form this data. The ethical component and the competency component are not apples to apples. They're not a 50-50 split. Ethical things like your purpose, your dependability, and your integrity are 75% of this measure, whereas competency is just 25% of this measure. And we all need to remember that. If I think of communicators right now, as people who are engaging with stakeholders, if we're leaning into these stakeholder models, trust is our currency. And so we need to go into the boardroom and we need to approach our work thinking about dependability, purpose, and integrity, and being not the conscience of our organizations, but at least advocates for considering the impact on trust when we see our clients or our decision makers in our organizations needing to be pushed maybe to do what's right, because at the end of the day, that is how you build trust.
One of the other data points from the study is really about, how are we handling retraining and reskilling our workforce? And I think that this is of special importance right now because according to the World Economic Forum, they recently put out some data that they believe half of all employees will need some level of retraining in the next 5 years. And so it's even more important to note that businesses lead by 10%. To be more trusted in this area than governments. However, it is critical for business and governments to partner in this process. So as leaders in our organizations, we need to be thinking about how we can be at the forefront of this effort. And that's how we're tying this part back into that talent development piece as well.
Because I think one of the things when we talked about how workforces and human capital are being valued that we haven't really incorporated here because it's just not topical in 2020, but I'm pretty sure it'll be our next crisis, is like artificial intelligence and how, that's why human talent is being valued differently. It's because we need people who can be creative and make decisions and do things that an algorithm or a robot can't. So I just happen to think that's one of the factors that are also driving this. We're just not talking about it as much in 2020 because we've run out of air in the room for issues.
Yeah, so again, back to some more examples of companies that are getting the trust element and really this kind of training element right. So first, we saw an example from US Foods where they loan their employees to their customers during the start of COVID. These were the grocers who were overwhelmed at the start of the pandemic, and US Foods saw a decline in their restaurant business. And so they took those warehouse employees and redeployed them to the grocers so that they can maintain employment while the customers also were cared for. So again, an example of the ecosystem being the focus and building trust with their internal stakeholders as well as their external. Our next example of Marriott, and this goes back to the second tenet of leadership too, because if you haven't seen it, Marriott's executive took, well, all the executives took a deep salary cut, but its CEO announced the cuts in a very heartfelt message to all employees, and it's on YouTube. And it's just amazingly touching and shows you exactly what we mean by, stepping up into leadership and being trusted. So I think it was a really good example of all of those things. And finally, Shell, where they've actually started this before COVID, and that AI, preparing for AI to take over. They started investing in reskilling their employees to learn the skills needed to leverage AI rather than seeing them be replaced by AI. And so again, seeing their workforce as an asset and really building those skills.
I have the fattest fingers, but sorry about that. Welcome to 2020. If you don't already suffer from an anxiety disorder, one will be assigned to you. I think, it's clear, and we apologize for making you all remember all of these sources of anxiety this year. But we also, have seen, looking at these trends, what a lot of other organizations are doing to equip their workforce for success today and in the future. And now we want to start to talk more about, actionable tips that your organizations can take.
Yeah, so as we ask ourselves, what can our organizations do to help employees through the crisis and also just thrive in the new normal and really take action to connect and leverage those opportunities that exist with the Great Reset. So again, we're going to kind of come back to those three tenets of maximizing human potential. So just a reminder here, same slide as before, we'll look at organizational culture, leadership, and talent development as modes of taking action. So starting with organizational development, I'm going to start with that quote again. If culture is not a building, then what is culture? And we've all had to kind of suddenly be forced to recognize this in 2020. And not every company, but a lot of companies have kind of built their culture around the interactions that they have within the workplace. And, in some cases, cultures literally, they call them collision cultures, right? Those moments where you collide with somebody and you have that conversation in the hallway or by the water cooler. And that's what's built them. And so without that, what do we do? And so I'll start with the definition of what organizational culture is. And I like the definition that comes from the Change the Culture, Change the Game book, which is also a resource we'll be giving to you afterwards, to a link to check that out. It's my guidebook of choice for organizational culture transformation. And they define culture as the way people think and act. It's as simple as that. But so how do we take action here, right? And what we recommend is starting by evaluating the organization's culture in the context of the new normal. And so what that means is, we need to be questioning what should remain and what needs to change to ensure your people and your community are all being cared for. And so step one is really about, being clear of your values. We've been talking a lot about values and how the company is managing them and showing up in not just the workplace, but in the community. And if you've done this work in the past, because a lot of organizations have, I think it's important that we take a pause and review them again in the context of the Great Reset, ensuring that it still represents our organization of the future. And for example, going back to some of the data we shared from the World Economic Forum, is if your values are primarily representing your shareholders, you might want to look more at how they should be focused on your entire stakeholder group, your employees, contractors, vendors, and the community. So it might be time for a revamp. Once values are defined, the next step is about aligning those values with experiences and the subsequent beliefs across the organization. And so this is the difference between your values being espoused values. These are the things we just hang on a wall or put on our website, versus the manifestation of the values through behaviors and actions of the people. So this is where, as an organization, but in particular, the senior leadership team needs to become crystal clear about what kinds of experiences will ultimately serve the values of the organization and lead to the behaviors and actions, and more importantly, the results that you need to achieve success. So when you define those experiences, because typically experiences is what we think of, what comes to mind when we think of organizational culture, because they're what we can touch and feel, right? They're the building that we are in, and the recent revamp of buildings. So they're pretty and they have all these spaces for you to collide and connect. Experiences are the interactions that we have, the meetings, the conversations, the parties, the events. And experiences are also how we manage and measure performance. So how we give feedback, how we manage performance reviews, how our compensation and rewards programs are set up. So all of those experiences combined help tell your employees and stakeholders what you truly care about. And so the question is, are these experiences truly driving the beliefs you want them to? So that's all the work that needs to go on to really understand, is our culture set up for success to drive the new results and the new outcomes that we're looking for? And so while you're defining those experiences, you also need to be defining those new outcomes and success results and criteria. And this work actually happens in parallel. It's not one first and then the other. It's bringing them together for a cohesive transformation. It's a lot of work, but it's worthwhile. And especially as you're thinking, if you're considering that, culture is not a building and maybe we don't need our building anymore, or maybe we need it, but not in the same way, having these conversations about what do those new experiences look like then for our employees, and for all of our stakeholders is critical. And then leadership. So people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. And that's just a fact we've known for a long time. But hopefully you've also seen loud and clear from the data we've shared so far that there is a need to increase our focus on people to get the most out of our human capital assets. And I really like the book by Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game, where he actually talks about there's two currencies in business, the will and the resources. The will of the people is about the feelings people have about coming to work. The resources are, of course, the money, the tools, the tangible assets of the company. And you must have both in order to be successful and play that infinite game. But the bias has to be towards the people. Resources will run out, but the will of the people will and can continue if it's protected. And so that's the idea here. And, to tag on to that, there's also it's represented by the servant leadership model. Really, if you've ever heard of that, it's been around for decades, but it's been gaining popularity in the last 10 or 15 years again. And the basis of servant leadership is that if we serve our people, they will take care of your customer. But how? Where do you start, right? And we're kind of coming back around to, we believe that you start by building trust. So to build trust, we want to share with you some key principles and consider how well your organization and your leadership is doing. So we're going to give you some questions to ask yourself. And while there are a number of behaviors that can either build or erode trust, from a communication standpoint, we highlighted just a few here to think about. So the first one is listen. Are you really focused on pushing out information and sharing information, or are you stopping to ask questions and really diagnose what's working or not working? So here we want people to be curious before they tell. Then the next one is knowing what you know now from listening first. Be transparent. How open and honest can you be? And are you sharing information openly? And to all stakeholders, who's getting the information and when is important as well. And then are you really confronting the realities and admitting mistakes when they happen? Because that's, a key element to building trust. And then finally, respect and care is showing stakeholders and your customers that you care about their well-being over the performance and profits of the organization. So this is where we believe, if companies can focus in on building trust and get this leadership piece right of putting your people ahead of your resources, that's really a critical aspect of this. All right. Third one, and then we'll have time for questions. So here we have actions that can be taken across the organization for talent development are wide. There's so many training methodologies and programs out there. And where to start here, we decided we'd focus in on that work from home talent development needs because it looks different than what typical talent development programs might be. But we've done this in categories. And so I think some of this might surprise you because it doesn't fall into that like normal training type of thing. But we will start with resources and environment. And I don't know about all of you, but I can say that I did not purchase my home with the mindset of I'm going to work every day from here. If I had, I would have required an extra bedroom and I'd be much happier. But so if your new space is not supporting maximizing your productivity, then these are some things you might think about to change. So start by creating a space that's dedicated to work, right? When you're in that space, you are there to work. So if you're at your kitchen counter, you're probably not avoiding things like doing the dishes or grabbing a snack every hour. And then once you've had your space defined and you've got it, you got to set it up and you've got to organize it. And, this is critical, minimize your clutter. I also think about just stocking it with supplies. And, a lot of us don't think about what we need because it's always been there at the office, but maybe checking with your employer to see if they can provide some resources or purchase some items that you were used to having. I know when our office officially closed and we knew we weren't going back anytime soon, I was able to take some of the double monitors that were there, and I can't tell you how useful they've been. So just figuring out if there's some tools like that would just make you more productive. And then finally, it's critical to set and maintain boundaries during this time. It's supportive of your mental health and your work-life balance. And this is the piece that I think originally, everybody got more productive, but that wasn't sustainable. And so what we recommend is set a time each day for when you're going to officially shut down. We used to have that, if you all recall, when we had to commute home. That was our shutdown. And maybe we went home and we worked on a couple more things, but it was literally the end of the workday, right? That's gone. So setting a new time. And when that time comes, actually close it down. I've heard of some people, locking their office door when they're done for the day, or if you're in another room and you can't lock that room, getting a space divider that allows you to literally like close the space off for the evening. These are really good suggestions if you're having trouble kind of maintaining those boundaries for yourself. And then next, this is what we typically think of for talent development. What are the skills that are needed? And so there are some competencies that are researched and found to drive success when working from home in that virtual environment. And so if these don't come to you naturally, then this might be something you want to work towards. Or if you know a coworker or somebody who's struggling in these areas, this is how we can help improve and support people through this process. And so the first one is really about working autonomously and taking initiative. And I know we all know people like this, right? That just, they need to be told what to do. And that was easy when their managers were there every day, guiding them and telling them. But the truth is, it's nearly impossible for managers to be stepping up and taking charge right now with so many dispersed people. And so it's really important that we kind of take charge of ourselves and what needs to get done. Communication, of course, and sticking with that, but not constantly being waiting to be told what to do. And then the next one is about persistence and enthusiasm for goals. So it just simply takes more effort. I mean, and more energy to be excited about goals when you're not around your coworkers and your leaders who are supporting you and kind of cheering you on. I know for me, that's been true, and the research has shown it as well. So finding ways and just gaining your own kind of awareness around your enthusiasm, and are you really excited about the work that you have to do? And if not, how can you get excited, or is this really the right place? And then the last one is just the need to become even more collaborative and open to opinions from others. So, we all talk about collaboration in our workplaces, and it's often a value that the organizations have. But in a virtual environment, we need to ask even more questions and be even more curious and find the time to use each other as sounding boards. It's all too easy to just say, nobody's there, I just can't ask them, I'm just going to figure it out on my own. And honestly, that's what leads to kind of lower success and lower results out of people. So these are examples of behaviors and skills that just typically come easier when we're face to face, but require conscious effort when we're working virtually. And then last is, you guys might not like some of these, managing our mental health. We need to start by managing our time. So tips for achieving focus and productivity is really about setting the boundaries and making sure you're prioritizing your own happiness and your own needs, which really requires that you first take stock of your day. So our first tip is to start by identifying your most productive working hours. This is what's known as deep work, when you can get a 90-minute or 120-minute time frame where you don't have any distractions coming out, you ignore your email, you don't have meetings, you're in that deep work space. So think about when you're most productive. For me, it's the morning after I've had my coffee and I just get fresh start every day. Set this time aside if you can, and try not to let any distractions or meetings steal that time away from you. And next is, being careful about burnout. So how do we stop ourselves from getting overly anxious about the work that has to get done? Because there's always too much to do, right? So the tip here is to not only write your to-do list, but also write your not to-do list. And it's important to just think about, I know that these things exist. I know they need to get done, but I am not going to commit to doing them today. And if you feel like you simply can't say no, I would recommend taking both lists and sharing them with your manager or a coworker and explaining that, I intend to accomplish these things today, but I'm not going to get to this other stuff. And you can have a conversation at that point. If your manager disagrees with what's urgent and important, using that discussion time to make sure you're right about your not to-do list. But that can be really helpful to just take your mind off and release that burnout. And then finally, I know we've all gotten quite comfortable with our work attire of sweatpants and cozy clothes, but unfortunately, studies have shown that maintaining your daily get ready routine does help your body prepare and your mind prepare for work. And so our recommendation here is just take that extra 30, 45 minutes every morning and do your regular routine that you did before. Take the time to dress for success, and it will put you in the right mode.
I think that same advice applies for exercise. If you put on your running shoes, you're halfway out the door. So, well, great tips. And in conclusion, because we want to get some time in for discussion, what do we mean by the Great Reset? We think what it means is an opportunity to evolve to this more stakeholder conscious approach. And to start to rethink, the role of the organization and how it treats its people and the kind of experiences it's delivering. And from a communication standpoint, you are your organization's storytellers. And when Mary says culture is not a building, what is it really? It's your stories. It's the stories that people tell each other about what it's like to work here and what we're all about. So I hope that you will start telling more of those stories that advocate for a great supportive environment for the teams that you serve, and that we've given you some new vocabulary and some other tips and tools. We did put the presentation on our website, so there's the URL for that. And we've included, I know Bob, you were saying in the comments, if we could link to the stats, you'll find all the different source material in there. So have at it. And what I'm going to do is stop sharing the presentation so I can see everybody's faces again. And if anybody has any questions, I saw some really great chatter coming in on the comments. Seems like a lot of people have a lot of pretty cool ideas and experience in this space.
Yeah, I'm going through to see if there's any. What about budgeting time for exercise or doing something different so as to relieve stress? Yes, Bill, one of the major things that is recommended is exercise. We kind of went away from the standard, what you hear out there, and tried to get new tips. But yes, taking time for anything that relieves that mental stress and gets your body moving is critical as well. And sleep, right? I think a lot of us, it's so easy to just either wake up early or stay up late and keep going, but you got to get, I can't say 8 hours because that's not what everybody needs. I know I need at least 7. So I prioritize that as well. A good point.
And I went for a walk right before this webinar. So I would, be oxygenated, but look where I walked to. So, it's a combination of caffeine if you don't get the sleep, right? Yeah. I saw DJ made a comment about stated values versus lived values and the culture. And, I think that going through so much disruption, there has to be bigger gaps between stated values and lived values, in 2020, like a lag behind, who we thought we were going into the year and who we are today. I don't know, Mary, if you have thoughts on ways that organizations can maybe take stock of how they're, like, what are some assessments that could be done by organizations to kind of re-engage people on values and see how they're doing?
Yeah, good question. And actually, DJ, I think you know this one. So there's an assessment out there called the Organizational Culture Assessment Instrument. That's a long name for OCAI is what it's also known as. And it's a great way to kind of look at where your organization is today and where the organization wants to be, what the preferred state is for the future. And so it's really looking at some key areas like how externally focused are we versus internally focused, or how structured and controlled are we versus, how open and collaborative and, flexible are we as an organization. And so it allows you to identify, again, where you are now versus where you want to be. And you can look at that against your stated values and see, do these line up, right? Are these words matching to what we say we want to be? And then start to define those experiences. And one example that's just simple, because I always see this as a need within organizations, is, they say they want to give feedback, but they have no mechanism in place for that. And so how do you start to build a mechanism so that your employees understand, how do I do this? How do I do it well? When it goes wrong, what do I do? So those are the types of things to consider if you say you want to be an open, collaborative, and feedback-oriented organization. So
I feel like similar to that were organizations during the, Black Lives Matter movement, initially making claims and supporting that movement on social media, and then being called out for having no senior executives or board members that represented the diversity they were trying to celebrate. So, people want to see that in action. And I think that's one of the positives that's definitely come out of these social movements, is that sort of focus now on accountability. Some might say that's also led to things like cancel culture, which maybe haven't always treated everybody, fairly. People are having their heads chopped off, on social media before anybody's really, digging deeper. But, we're just in a new environment, and I believe like there's some power shifts that have happened as a result. And it, I guess, remains to be seen when we come out of all this and our anxiety and stress levels are back to their usual high levels and not their off the charts high levels, you know, how people continue to behave. Are there any other questions? Because I thought maybe with our IABC San Diego chapter, I see, you know, here, and Orange County chapter, we could talk about quickly before we all leave what's happening in December. But I don't want to cut off any of this great discussion without making sure that there isn't another question waiting. Great. Well, both Mary and I really appreciate your attention, and I loved watching. I actually learned to multitask extremely well during this presentation, admitting people and watching the chat. So many great conversations and comments and observations. I'm not going to shut this meeting down immediately because, Mary, if you haven't had a chance, there's some really good stuff in here to look at. But from a IABC Los Angeles standpoint, I just wanted to let people know that on November 20th, first, we have our our communications lab. So it's a great small group, an opportunity to share and talk and network with other communicators in the LA area. And then on December 3rd, we're planning our holiday happy hour, and we're going to be fundraising for the LeGrant Foundation, which is associated with a communications firm that's been in business for 30 plus years in the LA market, but specializes in placing diverse leadership candidates. And yeah, Kay Sweetser, I'm glad that you shouted that out, because you are how I met Kim Hunter, who is the founder of the LeGrant Foundation, and he's agreed to join our happy hour and talk a little bit about what he does to foster more diverse communicators through scholarships and whatnot. So it would be great to see people there. Feel free to join from Orange County or San Diego. Jayanti, I don't know if you want to plug any of your upcoming content, or Dave, feel free to unmute yourself and share.
Hi, this is Jayanti. We're really looking forward to a holiday networking event as well on December the 10th. We usually do ours about 5 p.m. in San Diego. And if you want to dust off your ugly holiday sweater, you're welcome to join us. And, you know, it's usually just really a networking event. We usually do these in the summer and during the holidays. And I think it just gives people a time to meet each other and gripe about what didn't go well and what they're looking forward to going forward. So you're welcome to join us anytime.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much. Again, if you want any of that information on the pivotwithx.com website /The Great Reset, you can knock yourself out those fantastic books that Mary cited, and World Economic Forum Great Reset website, and the Business Roundtable website, where you can find just a rich source of material on how companies are leaning in to all of the issues we talked about today. Thanks so much for your attention today, and I hope everyone goes out and has a very productive, deep work afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. And really great comments. Thank you, everybody. Sorry we didn't get to them all, but
thank you.
Take care.